The streets of Cincinnati were cold that evening, the kind of cold that made even those with homes and warm meals shudder. The city's heartbeat slowed as night fell, and those without shelter huddled in doorways, hoping to find a little warmth. Among them was a young girl no older than 10, wrapped in a tattered hoodie far too thin for the biting wind. Her name was Emily. She had spent the last few nights sleeping under a bridge with her mother Lisa, after they had been evicted from their small apartment. Hunger gnawed at Emily's stomach, an ache she had grown used to, but never fully accepted. She clutched her mother's hand, her small fingers ice cold, and whispered, "Mom, I'm really hungry." Lisa swallowed hard, her own stomach just as empty. But what hurt most was the helplessness in her daughter's voice. She had always done her best to provide, to make sure Emily never felt the full weight of their struggles. But tonight, she had no answer. Emily's eyes wandered across the street, where a warm, well-lit diner stood, filled with people laughing over steaming plates of food. The smell of grilled burgers and crispy fries drifted through the air, making her hunger even worse. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. She let go of her mother's hand and slowly approached the diner's entrance. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, warmth enveloping her instantly. The chatter of customers and the clinking of silverware filled the air. At the counter, a man sat alone, stirring a cup of coffee. He looked up as Emily hesitantly walked toward him. His face was familiar. She had seen it on TV before. It was JD Vance, the senator known for his powerful life story, rising from poverty to success. Emily hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir. I'm really hungry. Do you think you could help me get some food?" JD Vance looked at the girl in front of him. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her oversized hoodie hung loosely on her small frame. He could see the hunger in her eyes, a look he recognized from his own childhood. Without a word, he motioned for the waitress and pointed to a booth. "Let's get you something to eat," he said gently. Emily's eyes widened. "Really?" "Of course," he said with a warm smile. "And your mom, too." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she turned back toward the door, waving her mother inside. Lisa approached cautiously, unsure of what was happening. JD stood up and extended his hand. "Please, have a seat," he said. "Order whatever you'd like." Lisa hesitated, but the hunger in Emily's eyes made her push aside her pride. They slid into the booth, and JD sat across from them. The waitress returned, and Emily eagerly pointed to a cheeseburger and fries, while Lisa, still reluctant, ordered a simple bowl of soup. As they waited for their food, JD leaned in. "What's your story?" he asked gently. Lisa sighed, glancing at Emily before answering. "We lost our apartment last month. I lost my job and things just spiraled. We've been trying to get back on our feet, but it's been hard." JD nodded, listening intently. "I understand. More than you know." Emily looked up. "You do?" He smiled. "I grew up poor too. There were nights when my mom and I didn't know where our next meal would come from, but people helped us along the way, and I never forgot that." Their food arrived, and Emily's face lit up as she took her first bite. Lisa, watching her daughter eat, felt a lump in her throat. JD noticed and spoke softly. "This isn't just dinner. I want to help." Lisa looked at him confused. "Help how?" JD reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "There's a shelter not far from here that helps families get back on their feet. I know the director personally. I can make a call." Lisa hesitated, tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," JD said kindly. "No one should have to struggle alone." A tear slipped down Lisa's cheek as she nodded. "Thank you." JD smiled. "It's just the beginning." That night, Emily and Lisa didn't return to the bridge. Instead, they had a warm place to sleep, thanks to one man's kindness. And for the first time in a long time, They had hope. As the evening wore on, Emily savored every bite of her burger, eating slowly as if to make it last. Lisa stirred her soup, occasionally glancing at JD with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had grown used to being invisible to people, walking past her and her daughter as if they didn't exist. But here was a man, a senator no less, sitting across from them, listening, caring. JD took a sip of his coffee and leaned back. "Tell me more about you, Lisa. What kind of work were you doing before?" Lisa hesitated, tucking a strand of unwashed hair behind her ear. "I worked at a small accounting firm. Nothing fancy, just clerical work, but I was good at it. Then the company downsized, and I was let go. I thought I'd find something else quickly, but with Emily to take care of and rent piling up." Her voice trailed off. JD nodded. "I get it. It's tough out there. Have you been able to apply for any new jobs?" Lisa sighed. "I have, but it's hard without an address or a phone. Employers don't want to take a chance on someone who doesn't seem stable." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Kind of a cruel cycle, huh?" JD's expression turned thoughtful. "It is, but it doesn't mean it can't be broken." Emily wiped her mouth with a napkin and looked up at JD. "Did you ever have to sleep outside?" JD exhaled slowly. "Not exactly, but I did live in a lot of different houses growing up. Some nights, I didn't know where I'd end up. My mom struggled with addiction, and we moved constantly. There were times when I was hungry, just like you." Emily's eyes widened. "But you got out?" JD smiled. "I did, and so can you." Lisa wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "I just don't know how." JD tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. "The shelter I mentioned earlier, they do more than just provide a place to stay. They help with job placement, childcare, even transportation. I can get you connected with the right people." Lisa shook her head in disbelief. "Why would you do this for us?" JD leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Because someone once did it for me." For the first time in a long while, Lisa felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The waitress returned, setting down a small to-go bag. "For you," she said, smiling at Emily. "Some extra fries and a cookie for later." Emily beamed. "Thank you." JD stood up and reached for his wallet. Lisa started to protest, but he waved her off. "This one's on me." He placed a few bills on the table, enough to cover the meal and then some. As they stepped outside, the cold night air was still sharp, but it didn't feel quite as unbearable anymore. JD pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Hey, it's JD. I've got a mother and daughter who need a safe place tonight. Think you can help?" A brief pause. Then he smiled. "Great. We'll be there soon." He turned to Lisa and Emily. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm." Lisa hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. As they walked down the street, Emily reached out and took JD's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. JD squeezed her hand gently. "Any time." And for the first time in a long time, Emily and Lisa weren't just surviving. They were finally on their way to something better. As they walked toward JD's car, Lisa couldn't help but glance at him, still overwhelmed by the turn of events. Hours ago, she had been preparing for another freezing night under the bridge. Now they were heading toward a warm bed, a meal, in their stomachs, and, most importantly, hope for the future. Emily held JD's hand tightly, her small fingers curling around his, as if afraid this moment would slip away. She had seen kindness before, but never like this. Never from someone who truly seemed to understand what it meant to struggle. JD opened the passenger door of his SUV and helped Emily in, making sure she was buckled up before moving to the driver's side. Lisa hesitated before getting in, her pride still warring with her gratitude. But when she looked at her daughter, her cheeks still rosy from the warmth of the diner, her stomach finally full, she took a deep breath and climbed in. As JD drove, He glanced at Lisa. "The shelter is run by some friends of mine. They don't just give people a place to stay. They help with job placement, counseling, and even financial planning. It's not a handout, it's a hand up." Lisa nodded slowly. "That's what I need, a chance." JD smiled. "That's all anyone ever needs." Emily, nestled in the back seat, looked out the window at the city lights passing by. "Mr. Vance?" "Yeah, kiddo? Do you think I can have a house one day? Like a real one? With a room of my own?" JD's grip tightened on the wheel. He knew that feeling too well, the ache of wanting something so simple yet so out of reach. He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "I don't think you can," he said. "I know you can." Emily smiled, a genuine bright smile that made Lisa's throat tighten. It had been so long since she had seen her daughter hopeful about the future. 15 minutes later, JD pulled up to a small but well-kept building, with warm lights glowing from the windows. A sign above the entrance read, "Hope Haven Shelter." A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, stepped outside as JD parked. She walked toward the car as JD got out. "JD," she said, warmly embracing him. "You always bring us the best people." He chuckled. "Lisa and Emily need a place to stay. I told them you'd take good care of them." The woman turned to Lisa and Emily. "My name is Margaret. You're welcome here for as long as you need. We'll help you get back on your feet." Lisa felt fresh tears threaten to spill. "I don't know how to thank you." Margaret smiled. "Just let us help." JD turned to Emily and knelt to her level. "You're gonna be okay, kiddo." Emily threw her arms around his neck, holding on to him tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." JD hugged her back, his heart aching in a way he hadn't expected. "Any time, Emily." As Lisa and Emily followed Margaret inside, JD watched them go, his heart full. He had been in their shoes once, and someone had believed in him. Now, it was his turn to pass it on. As he got back into his car, he glanced once more at the warm light shining from the shelter's windows. One act of kindness wouldn't change the world. But tonight, it had changed their world. And that was enough. As JD Vance drove away from the shelter, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been more than just a chance encounter. It had been a reminder of where he had come from, of the struggles that had shaped him, and of the duty he felt to help others walking the same path he once had. The streets of Cincinnati blurred past him, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Emily's innocent question. "Do you think I can have a house one day?" He had no doubt that she could, but he also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. A warm bed for the night was a start, but it wasn't enough. The next morning, JD picked up his phone and made a few calls. He reached out to a friend who ran a local job placement program and asked if they had any openings that matched Lisa's skills. "She's got experience in clerical work, right?" his friend asked. "That's right," JD confirmed. "She just needs someone to give her a chance." "Let me see what I can do," his friend replied. "We've got a couple of employers who are open to hiring people who've had a tough time. I'll get back to you soon." Later that afternoon, JD drove back to Hope Haven. He found Margaret in her office, going over some paperwork. She looked up and smiled. "They're settling in well," she said before JD could even ask. "Emily's been playing with some of the other kids, and Lisa's already looking into the resources we offer. She's determined." JD nodded, relieved. "That's good to hear." Margaret studied him for a moment. "You're not done helping them, are you?" He shook his head. "Not yet." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Some people donate money. Some volunteer their time. And then there are people like you. People who make sure no one gets left behind." JD didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for Lisa," he said. "Just something to help her get on her feet. Bus fare, a new phone, whatever she needs to take the next step. Margaret took the envelope, her eyes softening. You have a good heart, JD. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I just remember what it was like to need a break. As he left the shelter, JD spotted Emily playing on the swings with another child. She looked up and waved excitedly. Mr. Vance! He walked over, crouching down to her level. How's it going, kiddo? She grinned. This place is nice. I got to color, and they gave me a new coat that's really warm. JD smiled. That's awesome, Emily. She leaned in slightly and whispered, Mom's smiling again. She hasn't done that in a long time. JD felt a lump rise in his throat. He placed a hand on her shoulder. She's got a lot to be hopeful for. Emily nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. She handed it to him shyly. JD unfolded it and saw a simple drawing, a stick figure of him, standing next to Emily and Lisa, all of them smiling. It's for you, she said, so you don't forget us. JD swallowed hard, touched in a way he hadn't expected. He carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. I won't, he promised. As he walked back to his car, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. And sometimes, all it took to change a life was one moment of kindness and the willingness to believe in someone's future, even when they couldn't see it themselves. JD's visit to the shelter sparked the beginning of a new chapter for Lisa and Emily. Over the following days, a gentle routine began to take shape at Hope Haven. Every morning, the shelter would wake early to the aroma of fresh coffee and breakfast cooked with care. Lisa, though initially timid and overwhelmed, gradually started to participate in the community meals and shared quiet smiles with fellow residents who had faced hardships similar to hers. In one quiet moment over breakfast, Lisa confided to a kindly volunteer, I never imagined that someone like JD would come into our lives. I used to believe that help only came when you were lucky enough, but maybe things can change. The volunteer's eyes shone with understanding as she replied, Sometimes it's not about luck. It's about someone noticing you and deciding to help. You deserve every bit of kindness you're getting now. Meanwhile, JD continued to check in with Margaret at Hope Haven, making sure Lisa and Emily were settling in comfortably. He often stopped by in the afternoon, not just as a benefactor but as a mentor and friend. One particularly crisp afternoon, JD found Lisa in a small, common area, reading a worn-out book by the window. The sunlight poured in through the glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Mind if I join you? JD asked, his voice gentle. Lisa looked up, surprised but grateful for the company. Not at all, she answered, her tone hesitant yet hopeful. JD pulled up a chair and sat beside her, careful to give her space while still offering warmth. So, JD began, I checked in with my friend from the job placement program. They're excited to see someone with your background and skills. How do you feel about the idea of returning to work? Lisa hesitated, her eyes fixed on the pages of her book for a moment before she replied, I'm scared, to be honest. I've been out of the workforce for so long, and the idea of re-entering feels overwhelming. What if I fail again? JD reached out and placed a reassuring hand over hers. I know the fear, Lisa. I've been there. But sometimes, every new beginning comes with a few uncertain steps. The important thing is that you're ready to try. His tone was firm yet compassionate. And remember, setbacks aren't failures. They're part of the journey. The conversation meandered from work to memories of days long past. Lisa recalled how, as a young woman, she dreamed of a career that would let her help others, only to have life's unpredictable currents sweep her away from that path. JD, in turn, shared fragments of his own journey, the challenges of unstable housing, nights when he wasn't sure if the next meal would come, and the small miracles that slowly built his future. Their shared vulnerability forged a connection, one that hinted at new possibilities. Emily, ever perceptive, often listened to these quiet exchanges from the hallway. One afternoon, as the conversation grew lighter with laughter and memories, she sidled up to them, clutching a small notebook. "Can I show you my drawings?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and shyness.